Thank you, Sonny. Welcome home.
Yeah.
Good morning again, everyone. Happy birthday, Darlene. Happy birthday, Reverend Larry. Happy engagement to my little sister Mallory, who's back there. Once you set a date, you have to let me know because I'll have a full sermon prepared to share with you and Mark, especially Mark, before the wedding. Congratulations. So we're continuing to explore the power of thought this month. And last week we asked the question, what was I thinking? Today we ask, who do you think you are? And to start us off, a little ancient Tibetan wisdom from the Tibetan book of the Great Liberation on the topic of this thing we call our minds. In its true state, mind is naked, immaculate, transparent, empty, timeless, uncreated, unimpeded, not realizable as a separate thing, but as the unity of all things, yet not composed of them, undifferentiated, self-radiant, indivisible, and without qualities. Your own mind is not separate from other minds. It shines forth, unobscured for all living beings, without beginning or ending. Your original wisdom has been shining forever like the sun. To know whether or not this is true, look inside your own mind. Pretty deep stuff, no? And perhaps we should take a look at our own minds and see if it rings true. It's a little hard for me because I see a lot of clowns and ice cream cones and Chili Willy cartoons and all sorts of stuff going on in my mind. Yet, maybe if you were to translate this statement as just kind of feel your mind. Feel what we call intelligence before you give it words, before you give it images. And perhaps, maybe, just maybe, you can get a glimpse into the brilliance of mind that we also in our philosophy call spirit. It's an amazing thing to realize that who we are is grounded in this thing called consciousness, which is connected and a part of something infinite and radiant and magnificent. And it seems part of the challenge of life is learning to get just a glimpse into this thing called the truth of who I am, so that I might take just a brief glimmer of it into this thing called who I think I am. And if I could do that, I can set into motion a greater understanding and a greater flow of my life on a daily basis. I think that's what spirituality is at its essence. It's bridging that difference between who I think I am and who I really am. It's bridging that difference between who you think you are and who you really are. And again, when we get a glimmer of the glimpse, it evolves this way that we think about ourselves, and our lives begin to take on a reality more in accordance with our wholeness and with the truth of who we are. This story of the bridging between who we really are and who we think we are is at the center of every great adventure story that you've ever heard. Always, the character is learning to discover his or her true self. If it's a sequel, it's because they've forgotten what they remember the first movie. If it's a trilogy, it's someone standing in the way between them and realizing their truth, and so on. But it's always the same formula. We can take probably the greatest hero of our modern day, Mr. Harry Potter, right? And what makes Harry so wonderful is that he's the greatest wizard there is. That he can defeat and overcome any evil or any fear. That he's filled with love in his heart and uses it to his advantage. But what makes Harry a hero, what makes us love him so much, is that he's an orphan. That he's lost his parents. It's that he lives with a family that treats him like a second-class citizen, and he has to sleep in the closet. So he doesn't know who he is, and then all of a sudden an owl comes with an invitation, right, to Hogwarts, school of witchcraft and wizardry. and the adventure begins. He gets that hint that maybe who I think I am, who others are telling me I am, and what the world is telling me I am isn't so true. He begins to get this glimpse that he's something more than that, and every adventure that Harry then ensues is all about realizing that his parents may be gone from physical form but are always with him. That love is more powerful than anything. That by realizing and standing in his greatness, anything can be accomplished. So we see that Harry's story becomes our own story pretty quick, doesn't it? And this is true in fiction, but it's also true in nonfiction. It's also true of people in our own history and in our own individual lives. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, the byproduct of that inspired civil rights champions everywhere. But in all honesty, for Rosa, she was simply standing up that day to say no to who the world was telling her she was, or to who people were trying to tell her that she was, or this individual on this day was trying to tell her who she was. She was overcoming the beliefs that she may have fallen into about herself to stand in a greater, more grand belief. She shared later on in her life, I had given up my seat before, but this day I was especially tired. Tired from my work as a seamstress and tired from the ache in my heart. And that's the great potential consequence of not knowing who we are, of allowing who we think we are to be so negative that it poisons the heart. That we have to be reborn, we have to stand up, we have to stand tall. This is the story, and so many stories of the life of Maya Angelou, who we lost from our physical form a couple of weeks ago, and I know there's been many great memorializations of who she is and who she was and who she continues to mean to so many people. And she was most famous as a poet, but she lived many different lifetimes, they say. In her first decade of life, her parents were divorced, and she went to live with her mom, and her mom had a boyfriend who turned out to be a really awful guy and did some of the most awful things you could imagine to poor Margaret, which was her name at the time. And she did the right thing, and he was put in jail, but he only had to stay one night. And he was released, and a few days later he was found murdered. And Margaret knew that it was probably her uncles, people in her family. And so here's this woman who would one day become perhaps the greatest, well, certainly the greatest poet of our modern era, and she became a mute. For several years in her life, she didn't speak a word because she came to believe that her words were so powerful they could cause death to someone, that they were that much of an ill, that much of a poison. And she shares that the only person who believed in her and saw who she was growing up was her grandmother, who would remind her regularly, even if you don't speak, I know the great things that you do. I know that you are God's child and that you will be that in the world. And she began to build up a voice, a voice that spoke for young girls, a voice that spoke for African Americans, a voice that spoke for phenomenal women, a voice that spoke for poets, but most especially she gave a voice to the soul, something that's true in all of us. She gave it a language, a brilliant language. She would say, you may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air I'll rise. What a great testament to the power of the soul when we are willing to let go of some of who we've thought we are, to let just a little bit through the cracks of who we really are begin to seep in. The Science of Mind magazine, a magazine our denomination puts out, chose Maya as her spiritual hero of the year last year, and Maya wrote and thanked them. She said, I'm a loyal and delighted reader of Science of Mind magazine and a student of the philosophy and the writings, in particular of Mr. Ernest Holmes. My heart was lifted when I found I had been chosen as spiritual hero of the year for your magazine. My prayer is with Science of Mind that you will continue to reach people who stand in need for your hope, your work, and your clarity. So I love the voice that is left to us of Margaret, Maya, and how it can continue to be a reminder to not be afraid to step into who we really are, and to be always willing to let who we think we are go, even if we think it's the best thing going. So this idea of the bridging between who we think we are and who we really are, again, it takes place in every great story of fiction. It's what happens to Indiana Jones, it's what happens to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's what happened to Rosa Parks, it's what's happened to Maya Angelou, and it's what happens in our own lives here too, isn't it? And the truth is, in real life, it's not always so easy that it comes about, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but I'm amazed at the stories of people in our congregation of how they've let go a little bit of who they think they are to allow who they really are to emerge. Someone in our congregation I have a lot of respect for, who was one of our practitioner graduates this past Sunday, is Nicole Von Antingen, who's here today, a member of our leadership council. And she shared with me leading up to this practitioner graduation, which is a culmination of almost 10 years of really hard work that she's put her life into. She shared this with me. She said, "Looking back, I can remember the girl who dropped out of high school at 16, who had 2 children by the age of 21, and was a full-blown drug addict and alcoholic by 24. I remember the girl who feared life so deeply she tried to end it on a number of occasions. This girl was so filled with anxiety, self-loathing, and despair she rejected any possibility for love, joy, or peace. She lost her brother and 2 years later her best friend. Finding comfort in food, this girl stuffed herself full until she reached 220 pounds. Life felt like a cruel joke, and the only consolation was that one day life was sure to end." And Nicole goes on, nearing her graduation, writing to me, "Today, as I look back, I know the past cannot hurt me, that it does not define me, and I am more than anything I could ever do, say, think, or experience. I see now that my dark night, my dark years of my soul, were not for nothing. More likely they were waiting for me to be whom I am now in order to shine light on them all. What a refreshing feeling it is to know that not only will I be of service to my fellow humans, but I am legitimately able to come from a place of understanding. I love myself today, and today I love me yesterday. I love that the only healing that ever needed to take place was a recognition of my divine nature. I am whole, I am flawed, I am joyful. I am now free to be all of me." So thank you, Nicole, for letting me share that about you today. And in Nicole's word, the simple directions on how we overcome who we think we are when it's a negative. And it's simply by realizing our divine nature, doing whatever it takes to do. And sometimes it means just simply trying to open up again that tiniest of cracks within our knowledge of who we are, within our judgments of who we are, within our beliefs of who we are, to start letting that light seep in. The other thing we have to do is we have to love ourselves. We have to forgive ourselves. I love how Nicole talks about loving me now and yet loving me then. Because the me then still needs a lot of love. The times might be over, but there I am. There we are at times. Maya Angelou spoke beautifully to this idea too. It's a little bit of a long quote, but I couldn't edit Maya Angelou. What a jerk thing that was. I don't know if I continue, even today, I'll start over. I don't know if I continue, even today, always liking myself. But what I learned to do many years ago was to forgive myself. It is very important for every human being to forgive herself or himself, because if you live, you will make mistakes. It is inevitable. But once you do and see the mistake, then you forgive yourself and say, well, if I'd known better, I'd have done better. That's all. So you say to people who think you may have injured, I'm sorry. And then you say to yourself, I'm sorry. If we all hold on to the mistake, we can't see our own glory in the mirror because we have the mistake between our faces in the mirror. We can't see what we're capable of being. You can ask forgiveness of others, but in the end, the real forgiveness is in one's own self. I think that young men and women are so caught by the way they see themselves. Now, mind you, when a larger society sees them as unattractive, as threats, as too black or too white, or too poor or too fat or too thin or too sexual or too asexual, that's rough. But you can overcome that. The real difficulty is to overcome how you think about yourself. If we don't have that, we never grow, we never learn, and sure as hell should we never teach. Her words, remind me of getting the opportunity in early adulthood to get to teach folks who are working with kids. I got to work with a teen program, and so I got to run a workshop, and there was all these folks that wanted to be advisors and things like that in a circle. just went around and just asked everyone to share who they are, why they were taking the training, and at the end, if they could just simply say the words, and I am magnificent. So we went around and a lot of people struggled. Some of them may even struggle like I struggle sometimes. Oh, another airy-fairy religious science exercise. Here it goes. But the point that I want to make was really, really strong and really real, which is when it comes to teaching our kids, and just like we try to teach our kids in there, the central premise, the central idea at the heart of what we want to teach them is that if it's this idea that they are magnificent, that they're a child of God, and that by realizing their magnificence, they can utilize and demonstrate in their lives and perform greater things than we ever imagined our generation can accomplish. If that's what we want to teach them, then we are hypocrites if we are unwilling to claim and know that about ourselves. How can we ever expect to teach our children their magnificence if we cannot embrace it and know it and live it in our own being? That's the great challenge of being willing to surrender all the crap that can go along sometimes with who we think we are, to allow our magnificence to reveal and demonstrate itself in powerful ways. Like I was saying earlier, the signs don't come as easy as they do to Harry Potter in our own lives. An owl probably isn't going to come to your window. Obi-Wan Kenobi's probably not going to come to your house. God's probably not going to shout at you through a burning bush. But I remember something that Meister Eckhart said. He said that I have never seen God, but sometimes I have felt God like someone clearing his throat in an empty room. It's the idea that the divine and our truth has to come to us subtly because it has to take place through our own minds. We've trained them to see in such a way, to understand in a certain way, that indeed through our own spiritual practice, through our own willingness, sometimes through feeling beaten down by life, we allow those cracks again to emerge that allows who we really are to inform us, to inspire us, to bring us to words, to bring us to articulating our true path in relationship with life. It's the true demonstration of what faith is. Something else I love that Maya Angelou said, she said that faith isn't belief in the invisible, it's evidence of the invisible. I'm paraphrasing there. The idea being, because part of us feels innately our connection with something greater, feels innately a sense of wholeness, feels innately a sense of love, then it informs our faith. It informs how we choose to show up in the world. Our faith is not what brings it about. It is the very byproduct of what we deep down know in our bones and on our entire being to be. So our charge, the calling, is to be that which deep down and hopefully all around you know what you are. So just taking a moment of prayerfulness here, I just simply recognize that divine truth, which each of us must interpret in her own way, in our own time, in our own affairs. Yet let us open ourselves that much more to a new understanding of wholeness, of divinity, to a renewed understanding of self-care and self-love, to a rejuvenated sense of awe and wonder at this thing called life. Let us never underestimate the importance of ourselves to be a presence in this world, in our families, in our work, for this divine to reveal itself unto us and as an example unto others. In gladness we let it be, and so it is. Amen. So thanks for your time, everybody. And so excited to be here.